I feel MBM is very much a part of my life. My son did his ministry training here a long time ago. Is there anyone who was here when Kamal was? Oh, wow. When was it? Must be like 10, 12 years ago? A long time ago. Yeah, a long time ago. So my connection with your church goes back to when you were in a school hall across the way. It's a great pleasure to be here, but it isn't such a wonderful pleasure to be talking about the topic we are talking about today, which is pornography, women and pornography. You see, how does pornography affect women? We sort of tend to think that it is a boy's problem, because that's the way culture, that's the way it's been shown to us. That's how the media portrays it. It is something that is a men's problem. However, today we know that when we look at statistics, it's almost 1/3 and rising of the number of women who are using porn. So if you look at the full porn statistics, we find that about 1/3 of porn regular users are women. And it's rising. That's just a fact now. So there are women who themselves are porn users. Then there are women, and I also work as a sex therapist, so we see women for whom pornography is a problem because it is in their husbands or even their fiancé. And I'm talking Christian women who've come to me and said, you know, my husband or my fiancé, or couples who come to me, and I'll talk to you more about this. Then, of course, there's women who, as parents, as aunties, as grandparents, are seeing porn use in young people, children, grandchildren. Because today, the average age of porn exposure is 11 to 12 years. I'm going to just stop here and do a sound check. Is it all right? All good? Okay. Right. So, pornography. You're all sitting there thinking, okay, so she's given us a background of porn, but what and how did this old postmenopausal subcontinental woman get into talking about sex and porn anyway? So having given you a background of the topic, let me just give you a background of how I got into it. That is, not into porn, but into sex. Always lightens things up. You know, although I did walk in and look at the chains and, you know, I thought, gee, some kind of mood setting here today, Ray's done. But anyway, so I was born in Sri Lanka, in the tea plantations of Sri Lanka, went to medical school there, and then went over to Hawaii, and that's where I actually got into sex. Great place to get into sex, Hawaii. My professor was one of the world's best known, what we call sexologist. And that's the time I started working in his clinics, and I did my postgraduate study in sexual health, specifically sexuality, and within that, my main area of study at that time was gender, which is also something I'm really passionate about, the issue of gender. Went back to Sri Lanka, and I was the only sex therapist in the country. That's a real challenge with 20 million population. Then after that, we moved, 25 years ago, we moved to Australia, mainly to get our son away from the ethnic problems, because my husband and I belong to the two ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. Of course, he ended up as a Presbyterian minister, so I don't know about getting him out to a better life, but anyway. So that's my background, and that's the porn background we're going to talk about. So if we are discussing porn, the first thing we need to talk about, understand, is what is porn? Porn, and this you need to understand very clearly, is anything that is sexual, explicit, and intended to arouse. So medical textbook is not pornography, even if it has genital pictures, because it may be explicit and it may show you genital organs, but the intention is education. It is not intended to arouse. Now, Sexually explicit, therefore, means any images of female or male nudity, semi-nudity, implied sexual activity, or actual sexual activity. That's why this is a standard definition. There's one very important thing, and that is to remember that porn is not just videos or movies. It is also literary works. Ladies, we live in a world where a book about a female virgin and a sadomasochistic, obsessive, control freak male becomes an international bestseller. That is the reality, and that is pornography. I also do some creative writing, and I was at the literary festival, the publishers' workshop, and they were openly talking about how they're looking for people who can write cross-genre porn. In other words, vampires and porn. Or, who are the guys? Werewolves and porn. Who are the dead guys who walk around? Zombies and porn. So they call it erotica, but the reality is that literary porn is now a whole genre. And it's particularly so because women are more readers than visual. Women are much more contextual in their sexuality anyway. Men will sit in front of a computer screen and look at a nude female image and often masturbate to it. Ladies, I won't ask you for a show of hands, but how many of us would sit in front of a screen with an erect penis for anything more than a couple of seconds? I mean, God created beauty, but So the point is that we need to recognize that we like the context. We as women like the romance, the Valentine's Day stuff. You find all these men carrying roses and going home. I live in Parramatta, and so, walking through Parramatta yesterday, all these men or the girls holding the roses, which obviously their fiancés or their husbands or boyfriends have given them. I mean, there's not too many women who are taking flowers for the men. So we women like the context of romance, and therefore the literary works of porn, erotica, is written for women, and we must never, ever downplay that. So if you know someone who's reading erotica, I counsel couples, and I have women who come. I had a woman who told me, I'm no longer attracted to my husband. I can't have sex unless I read some erotica. Television shows, Game of Thrones. There is a site which has collected all the sex scenes from the last couple of episodes or series of Game of Thrones. Something like 16 minutes of sex scenes from Game of Thrones. I mean, it just covers every form of sadomasochistic and paraphilic behavior. I watched a couple of minutes, and I'm a sexologist. I work in sexual health, and I found it difficult to watch that. And if young people, if you are watching it, I understand the next series is just about to come out, and it's probably very exciting. I had somebody ask me, is it okay if we record it and then fast forward the sex scenes? What's that, like a quickie porn? I mean, it's like porn is porn. Music videos, advertising, we could go on forever about what is porn, but I think you've got the general idea. See, the thing about porn is it is fantasy sex. It is not real. We need to understand that. Our children need to understand it, because if the average age is 11 years when they're first exposed to it, they don't know what the real thing is yet. Porn, men and women have perfect bodies. Women's pubes are always hairless, although the recent news items say that maybe they're sort of swinging now towards the natural look. But up to now, women have always had that resilient, hairless look, genitals enhanced. Sex is divorced from intimacy, love, affection, human connection. Why would you spend time with connection It's about sex. It's about the act. All women are constantly available for sex, and they have insatiable sexual appetites. That's what's portrayed. Now, while you're listening to this, think of minds exposed to this. And what's the ideas they're getting about sex? Think of young people. Think of even older men who are watching this. And think of what they're getting. All women are satisfied by whatever degrading act men do. In my clinic, in our clinic, sex therapist, I do a little bit of sex therapy. I only see Christians now, because there's plenty of other therapists out there. And we get women who come and ask, is it normal for us to do such and such? And I know that that is coming from pornography. Acts that we never thought about or heard in our clinics are now being talked about by women in marriages. And of course, in porn, safe sex is never practiced. We never see it in porn because it's not sexy. So, what's the problem with porn? Today, in the time we have, what I'm going to do is just talk about 3 things. Now, we can talk about lots, and I'm going to give you fairly intense information. So, just sort of sit back and listen. I'm happy for you to have the PowerPoints available if anyone wants the information later. I want to talk about porn and the brain, then a little bit about what this porn exposure does to our life, and then contextualize it in the Word of God. Porn and the brain. Let's watch a little video clip on porn and the brain.
Besides being a zombie's favorite food, the brain somehow manages to process every stimulus that we come into contact with. But what happens when porn is the stimulus? This is Intriguology. In case you weren't aware, don't lie guys, you're very aware. Pornography is material that depicts sexual organs or sexual activity. But why is it so addictive? While you watch, the brain releases chemicals called neurotransmitters that work together to make you crave the feeling that watching porn gives you. Dopamine, which makes you feel good, rewards you for doing something essential to survival, such as eating, exercising, and making babies. Norepinephrine helps you remember. Oxytocin helps create an association of porn and good feeling, and serotonin causes you to feel relaxed. So what's the difference between watching a normal movie and a pornographic one? Let's say this blue guy is watching a normal neutral movie, while this red guy is watching a sexually explicit one. What's the difference? Nothing extraordinary happens to the blue guy, however, the red guy's dopamine levels rise and his visual field narrows because less blood is now needed in his brain's visual cortex. That blood is now being used in his naughty bits. But why is the blood taken from his visual cortex? Ever heard the myth that masturbating makes you blind? This myth comes from the visual cortex losing blood due to the fact that masturbating and watching porn doesn't require a precise perception of the entire visual field. But what about the neurotransmitters? These are being released in his brain and cementing the association between porn and pleasure. After prolonged consumption, the brain becomes desensitized to the levels of dopamine released when watching porn. Now he has to consume more in order to achieve the same high. Porn consumption has also been linked to decreased sexual drive, relationship problems, and erectile dysfunction. The brain is always changing through a process called plasticity. Watching porn literally changes the brain, creating new neural networks that are reinforced by the release of dopamine. Real sexual encounters tend to lose their potency because they cannot compete with the levels of dopamine released when watching porn. Therefore, many men quickly lose interest in their partner, preferring the novelty of having many partners that porn offers instead. It's not all terrible, there is hope. Quitting porn is much easier than quitting cocaine, a drug that elicits similar responses from the brain. It is possible to quit immediately and not experience any major negative side effects. Besides, you can release dopamine by exercising, doing the nasty with a real person, and eating amino acid-rich foods such as turkey, soy, and chocolate. All it takes is a little willpower. Intrigued by something? Leave it in the comments below or on Facebook and Twitter. Don't forget to hit that naughty like button or whip that sexy subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.
I don't think we see you next week, but that's okay. So you see, what we see there is that now we have a science behind understanding what porn does to our brain. Porn uses the same circuits as falling in love. Dopamine. Yesterday was Valentine's Day. You know, There were so many people around Sydney whose dopamine levels were going through the roof. It's falling in love stuff. Porn uses that, but it gives you this super high, and it gets you addicted to that super high. So you want more and more, and then you get desensitized to the normal dopamine release. You want that extra stimulation. Then what they don't even talk about there is that our brain has things called mirror neurons, so that when you watch something so exciting, your brain actually puts you in that action. And this is particularly so if you stimulate yourself, you masturbate to it. So you are actually in it. You're mirroring it, and that makes it even more wired into your brain. Your neurons, your brain gets rewired. Your desire circuits get rewired when you watch it. And after a while, as it says in that, the normal stimulation is just not enough. And so you may watch a certain level of porn, but then you want something that is deeper or worse and more sexual or abusive. So it keeps getting, like there they have, like I'll take two, you want something that is even, they even give it a name, it's called gonzo porn, the most sort of severe, abusive, degrading to women type porn. It sets up that. The best way or the easiest way to think of it is like you're going for a walk and you see something pretty over there. You decide you'll sort of squeeze through the bush towards that. The first day it's a little difficult. The next day it's a little easier and a little easier. After a while, that becomes the path you take. That is what happens to our desire circuits with regular porn use. It becomes rewired, or we even call it pornified. We have a whole vocabulary around porn now. Our whole desire circuit becomes pornified. People even begin to bond with porn stars. Apparently there's one guy I read somewhere who went and bought all the porn videos that a particular porn star had made, because she was his porn star. He was bonded to her. So your brain even bonds to porn stars. So this is how pornography affects our brain. Let's spend a little time talking to what it actually does in life. So that's the science we looked at. What's the evidence? There's research to tell us this. What happens in young boys? Now in young boys and young girls, we're talking about like preteens and teenagers and young adults. The brains are particularly vulnerable. Remember they used the word plasticity there? That is, all of us, our brains can be rewired. But in teens and young adults, the brains are still wiring. So it's even earlier than rewired. Those brains are still being in progress of being formed. It's a developing brain. The nerve connections, we call them synapses, are still forming. Everything that goes in will influence how the brain develops. There's even a science behind it. It's called epigenetics. That is, you have a genetic makeup, but all the inputs will affect how your brain develops. Is it any surprise that in Philippians 4:8 we read, watch what you put into your brain. Think about things that are pure and good. 2,000 plus years ago, Paul knew about neuroplasticity and brain wiring. And it's just so true, and now science is showing us that young brains, developing brains are particularly susceptible. This is what we see in boys who watch porn. They begin to accept that being masculine means you've got to have it through sexual achievement. They're permissive to extreme tastes. I wrote a book called Teen Sex by the Book. Some of you might have seen it. And in that book, to write the book, I interviewed young girls and boys, but mainly girls. Girls were telling me all our boyfriends watch porn. One young girl of year 10, I think, she said, my boyfriend asks me to groan like a porn star. This is young girls telling us. This is the boys, what's happening to our boys' brains. They begin to just take it for granted. You know, these women are sluts and men are studs, and the more sex you have, the more manly you are. There is a focus on the body. You know, there was a time when we thought that like eating disorders, body image was a girl's problem. Now we know that it's not, that we are seeing a larger number of young boys who are very conscious of body image. And we are beginning to think that some of that at least is driven by porn, because the men, the bodies they are seeing in porn are those sort of super studs with the perfect six-pack and penis that seems to stretch forever and go on forever. And they're beginning to measure themselves up, not against what they see from a brother or a parent or an uncle or someone, but they're beginning to measure their bodies against porn stars. This is what we are seeing in boys. And what about girls? In girls, we are seeing again that construction of gender, femininity, and sexuality. We call it the raunch culture. We give names to these now. Girls, you know, they have a permissive, they're developing permissive attitudes. You know, they're now much more accepting of teen sex, of premarital sex. I would talk to year 10s, year 9s in a number of girls' schools. I'm talking Christian girls' schools, but also public schools. I'll be talking to girls, and they're like, so what's the big deal with sex? That's a question they would ask. So what? What if I have sex? Where does it say I mustn't have sex? And if you are not a Christian, you have to go back and look at the science that actually now supports the fact that girls who have sex early, especially if they have intimate sexual relationship, sexual intercourse, or even genital touching, those who do it early actually have problems later in relationships. There's science behind it. It's not just the Bible, although the Bible does say it. It's the wonder is that science, and why should we say it's a wonder? We now have the science to talk to people and say, look, this is the word of God, but guess what? Healthy living, even social and biological research supports the fact that living God's way works. And, you know, if anyone's really interested, there's some really good books and literature out there now that supports that. But that's another talk. See, one of the big problems that comes out of this raunch culture is that girls are beginning to accept that exhibiting their body is what makes them powerful. Again, I'll tell you what one young girl, year 10, told me, or group of them. What they say is, look, okay, so the culture sexualizes us. Well, by putting ourselves out as sexual, and we were talking about them taking pictures of themselves called selfies and sending it to the boys called sexting, and this was the topic we were talking about. By doing this, we are now taking back the power. Can you see how it has been twisted? That by displaying yourself as sexual, in some way, it is now being seen as girls taking back the power. It's not. It's cheapening their bodies, but they are beginning to accept that that is what culture expects them, and that is empowerment to be overtly sexual. And there's an increase in the number of sexual partners. Today, the latest research we have from Australia tells us that 20% of year 10s and 50% of year 12s have had sexual intercourse. Now, when I talk to young people, I give them this statistic, and then I say, look, listen to that statistic again. This means 80% of year 10s and 50% of year 12s have not had sexual intercourse. So we challenge Christian young people, be countercultural, belong to the 50% who have decided to be pure, to keep out of doing. That's what we need to do. Challenge our young people to be different, because that is what they are called to be aliens in the world, to not conform. And as adults, we need to do it, and do it early with our children, with our youth groups. It's so important. Otherwise, this is where we will end up with our young people. We've got to start really early. Today we say sex education's got to start when kids are 5 years old. By the time they get to primary school, just like the story that Ali was telling us of the 10-year-old, by the time they get to primary school, they are going to be faced with issues. Not just pornography, the whole sexualization culture is going to hit them. So you, as the church family, as the parents, as aunties, as grandparents, it is your role before the kids get here. Then we have in adults. You see, adults, whether it be women watching porn or men watching porn, the wiring in the brain, whether you're watching it or whether you're reading it, whether you're watching it on the internet in the middle of the night or whether you're watching it on television, there is nothing called good porn. There is nothing called a little porn. Porn will rewire your brain. Watching porn will make you want more and more of it. It is what happens in the brain. So what does it do in adults? For one, it makes sex an object. It's a commodity. And soon we'll be looking at the biblical framework. But here, it becomes, the brain begins to recognize porn as sex. And so sex becomes a commodity like porn to be used and abused. So it's every gendered encounter. You look at a woman, a man looks at a woman and he sees a porn star. A woman starts fantasizing about men because she's making connections with the book she read. And no, the husband is no longer attractive. So intimacy becomes corrupted. And the reality. Look, porn. You just want sex, you just click or you open the book and you can be lost in your fantasy world. I've been married 40 years. It doesn't work that way. When you want intimacy, it takes time and it takes energy. You've got to work at it. I see a lot of young couples, so much so that we wrote a book for couples called The Best Sex for Life. And we talk about the fact that to immediate sexual satisfaction, and I'm really sorry for those of you who aren't married and think, you're going to get that wedding ring and everything's going to be perfect. See, the married ones are laughing. So you see, we call it honeymoon sexpectations. It's like saying, I think I want to enter the Winter Olympics next year, so I think I'll go over to Jindabyne to the ski slopes this winter. Takes time and effort to reach Olympic sex status. Any married couple will tell you this. But porn doesn't need that effort. All you need to do is open your book or click on the internet. And so that is what happens. You no longer want to have those connections. So you're no longer satisfied. Look, porn stars are enhanced. Their boobs don't jiggle. Now, you're not watching porn, but I was with some students and we were analyzing a short clip. And these are like sexual health students. I was director of a graduate program in sexual health. They pointed it out to me. They said, she's had plastic surgery. I said, how do you know? They said, look at the boobs, they don't jiggle. And I thought, oh, okay, they don't jiggle. That's the first time I really recognized that, enhanced boobs don't jiggle. Okay, so they don't jiggle. But you young ones, you're tight and taut, but you just wait till you're 68 like me. Things migrate to Melbourne. So, if you are, and it's not just in women. I mean, my 40 years married husband, I can't go, ooh, okay. So, things change. Your husband will not stay a porn star even if he looks like one now. There will come a time when he'll be seated like an old slipper in front of the television, losing the fur, losing the shape, but you wouldn't give it away because you love your old slippers, that kind of affection. But the point is that is what real life is about. But that's not porn. And after a while, if that's what you want, you don't accept it. That relationships don't mean anything. They don't satisfy you. You really, pornography is a Romans 1 lifestyle, because pornified expectations of partner behavior is distorting a healthy, godly relationship. Then we are seeing couples who need porn for sexual arousal, men who need to watch porn before they have sex, women who need to read something sexual before they feel sexually aroused. Sadly, there are sex therapists even now who are recommending that women read books or men watch porn or they watch porn together. No, it is a definite no. If you know anyone who's been to a therapist, been told that, tell them that is unhealthy. They're actually destroying their relationship. I'm coming from a point of view where 30 years ago, even we learned that it is okay to use erotica. This was before we knew what it's actually doing to the brain. And after a while, remember we talked about rewired brains? Your conscience is seared. You no longer even accept that there's anything wrong with it. And you begin to even celebrate the fact that porn is something that is good, because your brain has just got desensitized, going back to a sort of Romans chapter 1 lifestyle of like having a conscience that no longer accepts that there's anything wrong with it. Then of course, addiction is not recognized yet as a category. Porn addiction, sexual addiction is, porn addiction is not, but more and more scientists and therapists alike are beginning to accept that there is a category of porn users where actually it is an addiction. So that is the science, that is the effect on life. Let's contextualize that in terms of God's word. You see, our framework for understanding porn must have as its foundation a Bible-based, God-focused understanding of sex. You see, we'll never get out there and be able to say porn is not good for you if we can't undergird it by saying sex is a good, wonderful gift from God. The badness of porn can only be explained if we understand the goodness of sex as God meant it to be. And the best way to do is go right back to creation. You see, when God said, let us make man in our image, so in the image of God we were created. What do? We are created in the image of God to be rulers of the earth. Rulers of the earth in a relationship like the Trinity. We are created for relationships. We are initially relational beings. Porn uses that. Porn parodies a relationship. Can you see that? We are created for relationships, not always sexual relationships. We can have non-sexual, intimate relationships. And single women here will know that. You can have really wonderful relationships. That's what we are created for. Porn parodies that. We are created with bodies. We are embodied. But those bodies are made for healthy relationships. Porn says those bodies are made for your personal satisfaction. It doesn't matter what happens to others. We are created male and female. We are gendered. And in that gendered goodness, we have bodies that are made for relationship with each other. Yes, sex is the ultimate wonderful relationship, intimate relationship between male and female. But that is a naked and no shame relationship, one of total vulnerability of nakedness and total trust of no shame. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the goodness of sex that we are given. You see, the writer of Proverbs in Proverbs 5, I think, asks a man to be intoxicated with his wife. That's the kind of power that we are given. See, Satan loves it, and I'll just quickly go over this, which is the stages. Satan says, did God really say you're not supposed to watch porn? Porn, you can watch a little porn. That sort of denial, it's not really a problem. It's just a small bit of porn I watch. It's very minimal. It's only pictures. I only read about it. Oh, but then everybody's doing it, so you normalize it. I'm so stressed at work or at school. I deserve it. My wife so doesn't like sex. My husband is got erectile problems. He's had surgery and he can't do it anymore. So I need sex. I need. It's not about the relationship. So we can rationalize it. And finally, as we said earlier, you can celebrate it and say, the young people come to me and say, where else would we learn? Boys have told me this. Where else would I learn what girls like other than watching porn? Celebration of what porn does. You see, porn, ladies, is the ultimate idolatry. Everything about sex is twisted and tainted by porn. We are the image bearers of God, and we are made to worship Him and serve our partners in a married relationship. Porn turns this into the lustful longings, the caricatures of humanities that is a porn star. Can you see the difference there? How porn can twist a good thing. God's sex, God means it to be this sacramental glue between a man and woman. We have the science behind it. The more sex you have as a couple, one man, one woman, the more you bond at brain level. We even have chemicals, oxytocin and vasopressin, that increase every time you have sex with a person, same person, so that you bond with that person. Porn is the ultimate idolatry of Romans chapter 1. Exchanging the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings. You see how it's being played out. Porn is the ultimate of lustful fantasy, ladies. The writer of Proverbs understood it in chapter 6, 27 to 29. We are speaking of lust. He asks, can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burnt? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? Can a man or a woman watch pornography without his or her brain being rewired in terms of good sex? No, he can't or she can't. Lust never gets what it wants because it never has enough. And that is what porn plays on. It is never enough. Your partner is never enough because porn provides just that bit more. You see, in our sex lives, we become what we worship. And in Psalm 115, the writer speaks of those who worship idols and says, those who make them will be like them. And so will all who trust in them. See, the Bible gives us the framework. Sex is a good thing. The Song of Songs, our sealed section of 8 chapters of erotic lovemaking between man and woman. The sealed section of the Bible. And so, we learn that 3 times it says, don't arouse desire before the right time. It is wonderful. You see, love, the Song of Songs in chapter 8 says, love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like a blazing fire. See, sex is powerful. Satan knows that. That is why porn is powerful. Because sex is a powerful thing. So be aware. Don't ever think that this is something that you and I will never struggle with. I have worked in sexual health for 30 years and 25 years. And I can tell you, I have struggled with it because that's what I work with. And I sort of go to a site and you think, oh, that looks interesting. Then I think, what am I doing? I'm watching a porn video. So, it's so easy. It's so easy. So be aware that there is no room for complacency. Sex is powerful. We need to understand it. and take charge of it so we can direct it to the glory of God, because that is what we are created for. Satan has a field day when it comes to sex and the church. If any of you want statistics, and I don't have time to give it to you, go to the Covenant Eyes website. The Covenant Eyes website gives you current statistics updated every moment, actually, on what's happening in terms of porn use. Churches, the porn use in churches, this is American statistics, however, the porn use, the rates of porn use are no different. 50% of pastors say that internet pornography is a temptation. 50% of Christian men and 25% of Christian women say that they are compulsive porn users. This is the statistics we are seeing. Sexual sin, my dear sisters in Christ, is significant to God. Sexual immorality in Matthew chapter 15, Mark 7, we read, is a sin of the heart. Remember what God said about lust? Jesus said about lust. It's better you cut off a part of you. Remove your eye rather than lust. It is an act of darkness, we read in Romans. See, we are called to be different. And in that difference, we portray God's glory to the world. And pornography is a part of it. It's only a teeny sliver of sexual sin. We can talk of immorality, infidelity, there's so many other things of desire, but pornography is a small part but a significant part of sexual sin, because it is a wholly selfish act. It is about me and my satisfaction, and all of sex created by God is supposed to be other-oriented and caring for God, and finally in that, caring for God's glory. So, to finish off, just a few things. You see, if we have a sexual concern, whether it be you or whether it be somebody you know, a spouse, a fiancé, a sister, you cannot do it by yourself. The most important thing about sexual sin, especially porn use, is the need to repent and confess. Yes, get on our knees, get the person whom you know on their knees and repent and confess, but also repent and confess to a Christian brother if it's a man, or a sister if it's a woman. This is very important, because until you can turn that internal sexual urges over to God, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to start the healing. It's just like any other addiction. You need to do that so you can turn your eyes away from yourself and what's happening in your brain towards God's glory. The next thing is that you need to get help. So if as a couple you have a porn problem, or if it's yourself, you need people supporting you. We call them accountability partners. Yes, you can get Covenant Eyes or XXX Church, you can get the software in your computers, but the software don't always work on the mobile phones. And what if you're reading, and that's the kind of, you don't have software that lock up your books. So the fact is that you need people to support you. We call them accountability partners, who will walk with you as you rewire your brain. And it can be done. The wired brain can be rewired to healthy sexuality. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. So we do treat couples. I see couples where one or both, usually one of the partners, are porn users, and it can be treated, but it does take a while, and you need to recognize that. You identify triggers. What is it that really makes me want, or makes that person watch, and then deal with those. So you need help. Now, if there are children, you're worried about children, as we should be, the important thing, I don't have time, but I'm happy to, if you have questions on it, the important thing is talk to your children about sexuality early. I mentioned earlier, 5 years is when we start. talking about sexuality. Sex education starts with you. Don't leave it to the schools. Definitely don't leave it to the playground. You, parents, church, it is our responsibility to teach our children. That's a whole nother talk on parenting and on sexuality and sex education. But we have to do it. There was a time when it was maybe an option. It is no longer an option. We do it or the world will have our children. The teen sex book I wrote has a 15-year reading. I had parents coming to me and saying, by 15 the horse has bolted. We want something that we can give 9-year-olds and 8-year-olds to read. That is why it's important. Sex education, talking to children, being there for your children and being aware of what is happening in their lives is so important. And for yourselves. You may not be married. You may not have a fiance who's into porn. But you will have friends. Be unashamed to stand on your faith and on your beliefs. You need to be so sure of the goodness of sex as God meant it to be. And then you can talk to your friends who are talking about porn or watching porn, inviting you with them to watch a video or a movie, because you know that God gave it to you as a good gift. I would just like to finish with this old hymn, which says, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full on his wonderful face, and the things of earth will go strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. That is what we need, ladies. Our sisters in Christ, that is where our eyes should be. Porn will dim. Immorality, infidelity will dim if all our life is focused towards the glory of God. I'm happy for you to contact me directly if you'd like to. And I believe we have a little time for Q&A. Time to... And, thank you. Q&A time.
Is there a book that you can recommend to talk to 5-year-olds about sex?
Okay. Oh, shucks, I should have brought them. We actually don't have any here. There's a series of books written by Stan and Jenna Jones. It is a series, it's available at Kurong. It's a series of books that go from 5 to teens, but not teens. So he actually is talking to Anglican Youth Works Publishing, who are our publishers, about picking up teen sex for the American market. They're very Americanized. They're very American books, Stan Jones, but they're still very relevant. They're like, especially the younger ones, are like read along with the kids type books, so they're good. The other thing is that there are some good books now coming out from Youth Works Publishing, that is CEP, Christian Education Publishing, on talking to young children about pregnancy and mom's got another baby and that kind of thing. So there's a couple of books coming out. And we are writing one for like 9 to 13-year-olds now. Long time since I was 9, so that's a challenge.
Hold it, you're right, just speak.
Right. You talked about a lot about the brain being rewired. How can that be achieved when basically your earliest memory is of incest?
So the point is that any kind of sexual abuse, especially with children, will have an effect on long-term sexual expectations. And that is the reality. It's like what porn does to your brain. Early sexual experience will wire those sexual experiences as unhealthy sexual experiences into the brain. Couple of things. Firstly, it is the grace of God that can do it. And I mean, I'm not saying it flippantly, because I have sat with people where the memories are really difficult to work through. And it truly is the grace of God. The second thing is just having people with you who can talk with you, with whom you can share the pain. And I think sometimes we don't do a very good job of that as Christians, because we want only we're happy to talk about the good things, but the really difficult, painful things are really difficult for us to do. And we tend to think, oh, you've got to go to a psychologist. Sometimes it's not a psychologist who's needed, it's a sister to walk with you. And that sometimes it's often a very difficult role to play, because it takes time and a lot of love. But that's what it really is. Then, of course, the final thing is if you are in a relationship, and I see couples where their relationship is suffering because of one or the other. It's not just girls, it can be also a boy who's got a history of some kind of abuse, and being in a sexual relationship brings up those memories. And then we have to work out a way of building intimacy and washing out those memories and replacing them with healthy couple memories. So it's not easy, it's not one step, but it takes time. But in God's grace, with the help of God's people, it can be done. Yes, someone is going to ask that question. What kind of time frame? Okay. Are we talking about porn here? Porn use? Okay. Talking about porn use, it depends on what sort of stage we're seeing couple or person at. Sometimes I see somebody who comes and says, I'm addicted to porn. How often? Like once a month I feel like watching it. Right, you're not addicted. You're not even a compulsive user. You are like an occasional temptation to use person. So it depends. If some people are like just compulsive users, they use it, why are they using it? I go back to why. What's the trigger? So if it's like, I watch it when I'm really tired, then you find something else to do when you're really tired, like hot milk and go to bed or read a book, not erotica, something else. So it's finding what the triggers are. We get them to journal. So if it's something like that, that's, fairly early, it's fairly easy to sort of change the wiring. So about 6 months or so, they'll be fine. But if there are people who find that, that porn use is actually interfering with their life, they're using paid porn sites, or they're finding that they're hoarding up porn books, they're hoarding up porn videos, they can't go through a day without watching and more masturbating to porn, because that means you're reinforcing those circuits. Now, in that case, I refer them to a psychologist who specializes in porn, because that really needs more intense psychological treatment, which I don't feel that I have the time or the expertise to deal with. Those can take years to work through. But, couples do work through it. So it's never say never, because in God's grace, and if people want to change, it can be done. But the time frame is anything from a couple of months to a couple of years. Same with in case of, sexual abuse histories. Okay, so single women who are struggling with porn use, and you're a married woman, you're trying to sort of support a single woman. I think it's going back to what is the reason. Why do we find the need to watch sex, porn? It's going back to basics. What is the reason for sex? See, the world tells us, now we're getting into another lecture, another presentation. The world tells us that whatever we desire, we must have. So sex is a natural desire, and therefore I must have sex. So if I can't have sex, I'm a Christian, I'm supposed to say celibate, I must watch porn, I must read I've said it, read a book. I must do something, because otherwise I need sex. And I'm a Christian, I'm not supposed to have sex. What do you expect me to do? Of course I have to watch porn. No. There was nowhere that says that every one of our desires have to be met. And boy, oh boy, if you think that being single and you need to watch porn to satisfy your desires, you wait till you're married and you think your spouse is always going to be in the mood when you are. You're in for a surprise, young lady who is single, if you think once you're married. That's the point. You know, just being married doesn't mean that you've got a porn star there, ready for sex whenever. It doesn't work that way. And I think it's okay to share that with young women who are unmarried and say, look, it actually is no different even when you're married. You don't get sex every time you want it. And guess what? You don't feel like giving sex every time he wants it either. That's just how couple life is about. And so I think it's okay to share that with women. That marriage doesn't mean that you're in one erotic sex romp. One question, what proportion of married life do we spend having sex? Like 50%, 25%, 10%, 5%, you know. Right, on that note.
Thank you.